In the winter of 1959, 9 experienced hikers ventured into Russia's Ural Mountains on what should have been a routine expedition. What happened to them in those frozen peaks remains one of the most disturbing mysteries of the 20th century. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. Igor Dyatlov was 23 years old, a radio engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Soviet Russia. Intelligent, athletic and charismatic, he had already proven himself as a skilled mountaineer. In January of 1959, Dyatlov organized what was meant to be the crowning achievement of his hiking career, a Category 3 difficulty expedition through the northern Urals. This was the highest certification available in the Soviet Union at the time, requiring participants to traverse over 180 miles through some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. Dyatlov carefully selected his team. They were all students or recent graduates from the institute, most in their early 20s. There was Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko, both 23. Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22, was one of 2 women on the expedition. Rustem Slobodin, also 23, was known for his physical strength. Lyudmila Dubinina, 20, was the other female member, passionate about hiking and nature. Then there were the Dyatlov brothers' friend, 24-year-old Georgy Krivonischenko, and 2 slightly older members, Alexander Kolevatov, 24, and Semyon Zolotaryov, 37, a veteran with extensive mountain experience. Finally, 23-year-old Yuri Yudin joined the group. These weren't naive adventurers. They were seasoned hikers, many with years of winter camping experience. On January 23, 1959, the group received their route book and departed from Sverdlovsk, now known as Yekaterinburg. Their destination was Mount Otorten, a peak about 6 miles north of where they would ultimately meet their fate. The name Otorten in the local Mansi language translates ominously to "don't go there." But the hikers were undeterred. They traveled by train to Ivdel, then by truck to Vijay, the last inhabited settlement. On January 27th, they began their trek into the wilderness. The journey started well. The group moved through snow-covered forests, photographing their progress, writing in their journals, documenting everything with the meticulousness of experienced expeditionists. Then, on January 28th, Yuri Yudin made a decision that would save his life. Suffering from sciatica and joint pain, he turned back. He said goodbye to his 9 friends and began the journey home. He would never see any of them alive again. The remaining 9 continued deeper into the mountains. From their cameras and diaries, investigators later pieced together their movements. On February 1st, they began ascending toward the pass. But weather conditions deteriorated rapidly. Visibility dropped. Strong winds battered the slopes. Rather than descend and lose the altitude they had gained, Dyatlov made a fateful decision. They would camp on the mountainside. The location they chose was on the eastern slope of Kolashyakl. The name means dead mountain in the Mansi language. The hikers cut into the snow to create a level platform for their tent. They set up camp as darkness fell and temperatures plummeted to 40 degrees below 0 Celsius. Then something happened, something that terrified 9 experienced mountaineers so profoundly that they slashed their way out of their tent from the inside and fled into the lethal darkness, wearing only their underwear and thin sleeping clothes. When the hiking group failed to send their expected telegram to their sports club by February 20th, a search party was organized. On February 26th, rescuers found the tent. It was partially buried in snow, torn open from within. Inside, they discovered the hikers' boots, warm clothes and supplies, all neatly arranged. Everything they needed to survive was there, untouched. But outside, in the snow, leading away from the tent, were footprints. Some were barefoot, some wore only socks. The tracks led downhill toward a nearby forest. The searchers followed the trail. Nearly a mile from the tent, under a large cedar tree, they found the bodies of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko. Both were dressed only in underwear. The cedar's branches were broken up to 15 feet high, suggesting someone had climbed it, perhaps to scout the area or to see back toward the tent. Near the tree were the remains of a small fire. Both bodies showed signs of severe hypothermia, but there was something else. Krivonischenko had third-degree burns on his leg and foot. His mouth contained a piece of his own flesh, bitten from his knuckle. Between the cedar and the tent, searchers found 3 more bodies over the following days. Igor Dyatlov was found 300 meters from the cedar, frozen in a position that suggested he had been trying to return to the tent. His hands were clenched into fists. Zinaida Kolmogorova and Rustem Slobodin were found further up the slope, also appearing to have been attempting to return to the camp. All 3 had died of hypothermia. But Slobodin had a small fracture in his skull, though it was deemed not severe enough to be the cause of death. Then the investigation stalled. 4 members of the group were still missing. Weeks passed, then months. When the snow finally melted in May, a horrifying discovery was made. In a ravine about 250 feet from the cedar tree, under 13 feet of snow, lay the remaining 4 bodies. Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Semyon Zolotaryov, and Nikolai Thibault-Brignol. These 4 had suffered injuries that defied explanation. Dubinina and Zolotaryov both had multiple fractured ribs. Thibault-Brignol's skull was fractured so severely that it resembled injuries from a high-speed car accident. Yet there were no external wounds. The medical examiner noted that the force required to cause these injuries was equivalent to that of a car crash. But there were no signs of a fight, no defensive wounds, no indication of an attack by another person or animal. More disturbing still, Dubinina was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips. Some of the clothing worn by the dead showed traces of radioactivity, and perhaps most bizarrely, some bodies were found wearing clothes that had been cut or torn from the others who died first, suggesting the survivors had tried to salvage warmth from their deceased companions. The Soviet investigation concluded in May 1959 that the hikers had died from what they called a compelling natural force. The case was closed, the files were classified, but questions remained. What could have caused 9 experienced mountaineers to flee their tent in terror, inadequately dressed, into temperatures that meant certain death? Why did they cut their way out instead of using the entrance? What caused the severe internal injuries without external trauma? Why was there radiation on the clothing? And what was the compelling natural force that killed them? Over the decades, theories have multiplied. Some suggested an avalanche, though the slope wasn't steep enough and no avalanche debris was found. Others proposed infrasound from wind patterns, which could theoretically cause panic and fear. There were whispers of secret military tests, of radioactive contamination from a nearby nuclear facility. Some pointed to the indigenous Mansi people, though there was no evidence of their involvement, and no historical precedent for such violence. The most outlandish theories suggested everything from Yeti attacks to extraterrestrial encounters. In 2019, 60 years after the tragedy, the Russian government reopened the investigation. A new prosecutor proposed a theory, a delayed slab avalanche. He suggested that the cut the hikers made in the slope, combined with katabatic winds accumulating snow above the tent over several hours, could have triggered a small but devastating snowslide. The force could have caused the internal injuries. The panic could have driven them from the tent. The avalanche would have been small enough to leave little trace, especially after the wind and subsequent snowfall covered any evidence. In January 2021, Swiss researchers published a study supporting this theory, using sophisticated computer modeling to show how such an avalanche was physically possible, even on that relatively gentle slope. But even this explanation leaves questions unanswered. Why did they not return to the tent once the danger passed? Why did they travel so far into the forest? Why did they light a fire and then apparently abandon it? And what explains the radioactivity, the missing soft tissue from Dubinina's face, the apparent organization of the bodies in the ravine? The Dyatlov Pass, once called by its indigenous name of Kolatshiakl, has been renamed to honor the group's leader. A memorial stands near the site today, but the mountain keeps its secrets. 9 experienced hikers entered those frozen peaks with dreams of adventure and accomplishment. What they encountered in that brutal winter night transformed them into one of history's most enduring mysteries. Their final hours remain locked in the snow and ice of Dead Mountain, a testament to how quickly the winter wilderness can turn from beautiful to lethal, and how even the most prepared among us can face forces we cannot understand or control. In the spring of 1846, a group of American pioneers set out from Springfield, Illinois, with dreams of starting new lives in the promised land of California. By the winter of that year, they would be snowbound in the Sierra Nevada mountains, facing a choice so horrific that their names would become synonymous with one of humanity's greatest taboos. This is the true story of the Donner Party. George Donner was 60 years old when he decided to move his family west. A prosperous farmer from Springfield, he had married 3 times, and his third wife, Tamsin, was a school teacher, a botanist, and by all accounts, a woman of remarkable intelligence and determination. George's brother Jacob, 45, joined the expedition with his family. Then there was James Reed, an Irish businessman, 45 years old, traveling with his wife Margaret and their children. Reed had built an enormous custom wagon, 2 stories tall, with beds and a stove, which other pioneers mockingly called the Pioneer Palace Car. These were not desperate, impoverished people fleeing hardship. They were middle-class families, educated, prepared, seeking opportunity in the Mexican territory of California. On April 15, 1846, they departed Springfield. The journey was supposed to take 4 to 6 months. It would take them more than twice that long. At Independence, Missouri, they joined a larger wagon train. The journey west had become an industry by 1846, with thousands making the trek each year. And with any industry, there were grifters. Enter Lansford Hastings. He had published a guide claiming to know a shortcut that would save travelers hundreds of miles and weeks of travel time. It was called the Hastings Cutoff. There was one problem. Hastings had never actually taken this route himself. It was based on speculation and wishful thinking, and Hastings had financial interests along the route. He wasn't trying to help pioneers. He was trying to profit from them. In late July, at Fort Laramie in present-day Wyoming, the Donner and Reed families, along with others, made a decision that would seal their fate. They would take the Hastings Cutoff. James Kleiman, an experienced mountain man who had actually traveled the route, warned them against it. The route was treacherous, he said, unsuitable for wagons. They ignored his advice. The shortcut was a disaster. Instead of saving time, the Hastings Cutoff added 30 days to their journey. They crossed the Wasatch Mountains in Utah, a brutal trek that required them to clear their own road through dense forest. Then came the Great Salt Lake Desert, 80 miles of barren, waterless wasteland that took 5 days to cross. Oxen died, wagons were abandoned, supplies were depleted, tempers flared. James Reed, already unpopular for his ostentatious wagon and aristocratic manner, got into a physical altercation with John Snyder, a teamster. In the struggle, Reed stabbed Snyder with a knife. Snyder died. The wagon train voted to banish Reed from the group. He was forced to ride ahead alone, without supplies, without his family, into the wilderness. Remarkably, he would survive and eventually reach California. But the ordeal had only begun. By late October, the Donner Party, now numbering 87 people, including many children, reached the eastern slopes of the Sierra Nevada. They were exhausted. They were behind schedule. But they were close. Just over 100 miles remained to their destination. Then the snow came. On October 20th, 1846, an early blizzard struck. It was unprecedented. The Sierra Nevada was suddenly impassable. The wagon train tried to push through, but the snow was too deep. They were forced to retreat to Truckee Lake, now known as Donner Lake. There they would remain for 5 months. The Donner Party split into 2 camps. The larger group set up near the lake in abandoned cabins and hastily constructed lean-tos. The Donner families, about 5 miles away, made camp at Alder Creek. They slaughtered their remaining cattle. They rationed their food, and they waited. November passed. December arrived. The snow kept falling. Temperatures plummeted. Patrick Breen, an Irish immigrant traveling with his wife and 7 children, kept a diary. His entries tell the story of their gradual descent into nightmare. "It snowed during the space of 8 days with little intermission," he wrote in November. In December, "Bayliss Williams died night before last. We will soon be out of provisions." In January, Mrs. Murphy says the wolves are about to dig up the dead bodies. Tough times. The cattle were gone. The pioneers boiled the oxen hides into a gelatinous substance. They ate the family dogs. They ate field mice. They chewed on bones and boiled leather shoes. And people began to die. On December 16th, a group of 15 people, calling themselves the Forlorn Hope, attempted to walk out to get help. They strapped on makeshift snowshoes and headed west. The group included 2 Miwok men, Luis and Salvador, who had been sent to help the wagon train but were now trapped with them. For 33 days, the Forlorn Hope struggled through the snow. After 2 weeks, they were out of food. They had no choice. They began to cannibalize the dead. When people died from starvation or hypothermia, the survivors roasted their flesh and ate it to stay alive. They had considered drawing lots to determine who should be sacrificed. Some suggested a duel to the death, but each time someone died naturally before they had to make that choice, except for Luis and Salvador. When supplies ran out again and no one else had died, some members of the Forlorn Hope decided to murder the 2 Miwok men. They hunted them down and shot them. Then they ate them. This was not survival cannibalism. This was murder followed by cannibalism. The victims were the very men who had come to help them. Only 7 of the original 15 Forlorn Hope members reached a California ranch in mid-January. They told their story. Rescue parties were organized. Back at the lake, conditions had become unspeakable. Children watched their parents die. Parents watched their children starve. The living ate the dead. 13-year-old Virginia Reed would later write about this time, "We were surrounded by the dead. It was a dreadful sight. Hunger drove people to eat their own relatives." The first rescue party reached the camps on February 19, 1847. They were horrified by what they found. Skeletal figures emerging from cabins filled with decomposing corpses, evidence of cannibalism everywhere, children orphaned, traumatized, barely alive. 4 rescue missions were sent over the following months. Each time, rescuers could only take the strongest members out, leaving the weak behind to wait for the next party. George Donner was dying from an infected hand. Tamsen refused to leave him, even though it meant certain death. She sent her 3 youngest daughters out with rescuers. She stayed behind with her dying husband. When the final rescue party arrived in April, they found Tamsen dead. The last survivor to leave the camps was Louis Kesselberg on April 21, 1847. He had survived by cannibalizing the dead. The rescuers found him alone, surrounded by evidence of his meals. He would later be accused of murdering Tamsen Donner for her money and eating her corpse. He brought a defamation lawsuit and won $1 in damages, but had to pay court costs. The accusation followed him for the rest of his life. Of the 87 members of the Donner Party who became snowbound, 42 died. All the casualties were adults, primarily men. The children, ironically, had a better survival rate. Perhaps because the adults gave them what little food remained, or perhaps because their smaller bodies required fewer calories. The survivors carried psychological scars for life. Some never spoke of what happened, others defended their actions. Virginia Reed, who survived at age 13, later wrote to family members, "Remember, never take no cut-offs and hurry along as fast as you can." The story of the Donner Party shocked the nation. Newspapers sensationalized the cannibalism. Some portrayed the survivors as heroic, emphasizing the desperation of their choices. Others portrayed them as monsters. The truth, as always, was more complex. These were ordinary people pushed beyond the limits of human endurance. They made choices no one should ever have to make. They survived by breaking the deepest human taboo. What's often forgotten in the sensationalized retellings is the human cost. The children who watched their parents die, the parents who couldn't save their children, the indigenous people who came to help and were murdered for their compassion. The Donner Party story is not just about cannibalism. It's about the catastrophic consequences of bad decisions, the dangers of trusting con men like Lansford Hastings, and the terrible mathematics of survival when you're trapped in winter mountains with no food and no hope of rescue. Today, Donner Lake is a popular tourist destination. People ski there in winter. They camp there in summer. A memorial marks the approximate location of the camps, but the story remains, a reminder that the American frontier was built on suffering, desperation, and sometimes on choices so dark we can barely comprehend them. The winter of 1846 to 47 in the Sierra Nevada was a winter when the ordinary rules of civilization ceased to exist, when the only law was survival, and when the price of that survival was paid in human flesh. On February 24th, 1978, 5 young men from Yuba City, California, drove 50 miles to watch a college basketball game. They bought snacks for the ride home. They were last seen driving in the right direction, back toward their families. 4 months later, 4 of them were found dead in the mountains, miles from where they should have been, under circumstances so strange that this case has been called America's Dyatlov Pass. The 5th man was never found. This is the mystery of the Yuba County 5. Ted Wire was 32 years old, a gentle giant who stood 6 feet tall and weighed over 200 pounds. He had mild developmental disabilities and lived with his mother. His family described him as sweet, caring, and predictable. He followed routines religiously. Jack Madruga, 30 years old, was described as a slow learner, but he was mechanically skilled and extremely protective of his pristine 1969 Mercury Montego. Bill Sterling, 29, was outgoing and loved sports. Jack Hewitt, 24, known as Jackie, was quiet and kind. And then there was Gary Mathias, 25, an Army veteran with schizophrenia, but considered by his doctors to be a success story. He was managing his condition with medication and was functional and stable. These 5 men were close friends. They had met through a local program that organized activities for people with disabilities. They played together on a Special Olympics basketball team. They followed UC Davis basketball religiously, and on February 24th, they were excited because the next day, February 25th, their team had a game. If they won, they would go to the Special Olympics in Los Angeles. They had laid out their uniforms. They were ready. But first, they wanted to watch UC Davis play Chico State that night. The drive to Chico was uneventful. The editor of the Chico newspaper later recalled seeing all 5 men at the game, sitting apart from other spectators, clearly recognizable. After the game, they stopped at a convenience store. Security footage captured them buying snacks and drinks, chocolate milk, candy, food for the drive home. They were seen leaving, heading in the correct direction toward Yuba City. That was the last confirmed sighting of them alive. When the 5 men didn't return home that night, their families were immediately alarmed. This wasn't normal. The boys always came home. They had an important game the next day. Their uniforms were laid out. Something was very wrong. The families called the police. A search began. 2 days later, on February 26th, a forest ranger in the Plumas National Forest reported seeing a Mercury Montego parked on Oroville-Quincy Road, a remote mountain road about 70 miles from Chico, in completely the wrong direction from Yuba City. On February 28th, police tracked down the car. It was Jack Madruga's Mercury. The car was on a mountain road at 4,400 feet elevation, just below the snow line, on a road that was closed for winter. The car was stuck in some snow, but not badly. It could have easily been pushed out. The keys were missing, but the car was in working order. Inside the car, police found the wrappers and containers from the snacks the men had bought in Chico. They found the basketball game programs. They found a neatly folded roadmap of California. One window was rolled down, but there was no sign of the 5 men, and there was no logical explanation for why Madruga's car was on this mountain road. None of the families could understand it. Madruga was protective of his car. He wouldn't drive it on rough roads. Ted Wire hated cold weather. None of them had any reason to be up there. None of them had extra clothing or equipment for a mountain winter night. Police began searching the forest, but a severe winter storm shut down operations. The snow was too deep, the conditions too dangerous. They would have to wait until the snow melted. But there was one witness who came forward with a bizarre story. Joseph Shones, a man who had gotten his car stuck on the same mountain road that night, told police he saw the Mercury around the time the boys disappeared. Shones said his car became stuck in snow. While trying to get it out, he had a heart attack. In pain, lying in his car, he saw headlights approach. He saw people get out of a vehicle. He said there were several men, a woman and a baby. He called out for help, but the group went silent and disappeared. Hours later, he saw flashlight beams, but still no one came to help him. Eventually, Shones recovered enough to walk down for help. When he did, the Mercury was there, in the spot where he had seen the group. But Shones was known locally as someone who embellished stories. Police weren't sure if his account was reliable, and they could never confirm the presence of a woman and baby. Where would they have come from? The mystery deepened. The snow melted slowly. Spring came. And on June 4th, 1978, motorcyclists riding trails in the forest came across a Forest Service trailer, a small shelter maintained for forest workers, about 19 miles from where the car had been found. Curious, they looked inside. What they found was nightmarish. Ted Wire's body was on a bed, wrapped tightly in 8 sheets. He was severely emaciated. The autopsy would determine he had survived for 8 to 13 weeks after the disappearance. He had died from a combination of starvation and hypothermia. And this is what made no sense. The trailer had a propane tank. It was full. The trailer had a heating system. Wire never used it. The trailer had food, cans and cans of military sea rations, enough to feed all 5 men for months. Wire had opened and eaten some cans, but the majority of the food was untouched. A whole locker full of freeze-dried meals was never opened. Gary Mathias's shoes were found in the trailer, but Mathias himself was not there. Also in the trailer was a military-style can opener, the kind only someone with army experience would know how to use. Mathias had been in the army, so had Madruga. The implication was that Mathias, and possibly others, had been in the trailer with Wire at some point. Over the next few days, searchers found the other bodies. Jack Madruga's body was found on June 5th, about 11 miles from where the car was abandoned. Bill Sterling's remains were found the same day. Jackie Hewitt's remains were discovered on June 7th. All had died from exposure to the elements, but their locations made no sense. Why were they so scattered? Why were they so far from both the car and the trailer? The autopsies revealed more disturbing details. The bodies showed signs of prolonged exposure. They had been alive for extended periods in the wilderness. Some had torn pieces of their clothing, possibly to use as bandages or shelter materials. The physical evidence suggested these men had survived for days, possibly weeks in brutal winter conditions, but Gary Mathias was never found. To this day, his body has never been recovered. He simply vanished. The questions multiplied. Why did the men drive up that mountain road in the first place? Madruga had never been to the mountains. Wire hated the cold. The road led nowhere they had any reason to go. Why did they abandon a car that could have been easily freed from the snow? Why did Wire stay in a trailer with heat and food but die of cold and starvation? Why didn't they all stay in the trailer together? Why were the bodies so far apart? And where is Gary Mathias? Investigators considered every possibility. Had they been chased by someone? But there was no evidence of other people. Had they picked up a hitchhiker who led them astray? Possibly, but no one was ever identified. Had Mathias, whose schizophrenia was in remission but still a factor, experienced a psychotic episode that caused him to lead his friends into danger? His family vehemently denies this. Mathias had been stable for years. Why would he suddenly decompensate that night? Some theorists have suggested something more sinister. There were rumors of a fight outside the convenience store in Chico, though this was never confirmed. Could someone have been following them? Could they have been forced up that mountain road at gunpoint? Jack Madruga's mother believed this. "Somebody made them go up there," she said. "My son would never go up there on his own. He always came home. He was careful with his car. Someone forced them." The trailer itself raises the most disturbing questions. Ted Wire survived there for weeks, possibly months. He opened some food, but he didn't use the heat. He didn't open most of the food. He didn't leave to try to find help or to look for his friends. He just stayed there, in the cold, slowly starving and freezing. Why? Some have suggested he had a traumatic brain injury from an accident in the snow, but there was no evidence of this in the autopsy. Others suggest he was so frightened by whatever happened that night that he was too terrified to move. But frightened of what? The case has inspired books, documentaries, and podcasts. In October 2020, the Yuba County Sheriff's Department officially declared Gary Mathias a victim of foul play. The case remains open as a missing person/homicide investigation. But that's all the department has said. They have no suspects, no clear theory of what happened. The families are left with only questions and grief. Ted Wire's siblings remember a man who followed routines, who always wanted to come home, who would never have voluntarily gone into those mountains. Jack Madruga's mother still believes her son was forced up that road against his will. Gary Mathias's family insists that his schizophrenia has been unfairly blamed for a tragedy that had nothing to do with mental illness. What's perhaps most disturbing about the Yuba County Five is how close to civilization they were. The trailer where Wire died was less than 20 miles from the main road. The car was found not far from a highway. These weren't men lost in deep wilderness. They were men lost in accessible forest, with shelter, with food, with a vehicle that worked, and yet 4 of them died and 1 vanished. Was it foul play? Was someone with them that night who forced them into the mountains? Did they witness something that put them in danger? Or was it a series of tragic decisions made in panic, decisions we can't understand because we don't know what they were running from or what they feared? To this day, hikers and forest rangers report an uneasy feeling in the area where the Yuba County Five disappeared. The old Forest Service trailer is gone now, removed years ago. But the mystery remains. 5 men went to watch a basketball game on a winter night in 1978. They should have driven home safely. Instead, they drove into the mountains and into a mystery that has never been solved. Gary Mathias is still missing. His family still hopes for answers. And the snow-covered forests of Plumas National Forest keep whatever secrets they hold about what really happened to the Yuba County 5 on that cold February night.